when we begin to step into recovery, start to experience freedom, we start to see things more clearly. There is this incredible amount of hope and belief that everything in your life can be transformed by the work of recovery. Yeah. And so I began to realize that in time, there was so much that recovery could bring me. There was so much that I was excited about. And as I said at the workshop that time, and there's some things that it can't. Yeah. And so the first thing that I would say, one of the things that my recovery cannot do is change somebody else.
Right.
What it can do is influence somebody else. My recovery may invite somebody else to look at their own journey and story. But the reality is I cannot change somebody else through my recovery.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. Today we are back with Dr. Greg Miller, our host. Great to see you again, Greg.
It's good to be here.
He just flew in from Chicago, especially for this weekend's Men's Journey workshop. And while we have him in-house, we want to take advantage and produce some more of these podcasts for you. Our special guest today, speaking of the podcast, is the producer of the Faithful and True podcast, Aaron Wellmann. Welcome.
Thanks, guys. Good to be with you today.
Yeah, producer just doesn't seem to encompass all that you do.
No, there's many more hats.
And so it is great for you to be on this side of the camera and
Absolutely.
to be with us today. And you are so much of what the podcast is about as far as getting it out there, making it available to people. And so we appreciate all the work that you do behind the scenes to make the podcast possible.
Very much
we
so.
just show up and look good.
Well,
and we do that beautifully. We're Aaron's just the one that makes it happen.
We're just the pretty faces.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about the topic that we're going to be talking about, but also this journey that you've been on since coming to Faithful and True.
Yeah, it's hard to keep track of how long I've been working here, but it's been probably close to 10 years now, which is crazy. I was kind of telling my story as it relates to Faithful and True at one of our Christmas parties a couple of years ago, and I kind of had the image of like an IV drip is basically how like I was introduced to Faithful and True, everything that it is, whether it's the personalities, the people, the humans that are here, or the teaching, all that stuff. And because I started out just, working very, very, very part-time producing the podcast when Mark was still alive and he and Randy were doing the show. And so it's been years, and it's just been the slow process of kind of discovering a completely new way to live. That's truly what it's been. And that has kind of come full circle in my own decision about a year ago to begin doing my own schooling in marriage and family therapy at Bethel here in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so that's been a huge joy to get a year under my belt. I've struggled a lot with understanding what my gifts are. Do I have any gifts? If so, what are they? And I know I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for all the ways that I've been influenced by the people here at Faithful and True and the teaching. Been through the workshop myself, which was a huge experience, just an amazing experience. So I'm super happy to be here, and I'm super happy to look towards the future of being a counselor professionally as well. So.
Well, one of the things I love is sometimes these huge tectonic plates shift in our lives, and we have these big movements. Other times, though, it is, like you said, that slow drip, that steady invitation, that exposure to something that brings about a slow awakening to something. And so it's great to know that we've been a part of that awakening for you. And you responded to it in a very specific and concrete way of going back to school, working on your degree. And so it's been exciting just to see the way that you've been open to whatever the invitation is. We often talk about the next right step.
Yeah.
And in the early days for you, the next right step was just to show up, to produce the podcast, to be attentive to what it was that you were hearing,
Yeah.
and let God begin to use that to shape and form you. So that really is exciting.
And if you're going to force our hand in listing your talents and qualifications, this will be a 2-part podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
So we'll try to skip over some of that because you have extreme talents that we benefit from every day here, in the way that you produce the podcast, in the way that you take the podcast and present them in a visual format as well. You introduced us. You were integral in the creation of the Faithful and True YouTube channel. And now people do get to see us as we do this podcast. So we now have our audio version and our video version, but that's all, thanks to you and your proactive nature in helping us get the message of Faithful and True out to the public. So we, if we don't tell you often enough, we greatly appreciate you.
And
guys.
it's also a plug for community, because what's true is many of us have difficulty seeing ourselves clearly. And maybe we have distorted lenses of who we are and what we can do. And we carry the lies of shame and insecurity. And so it is helpful to have other people in our lives to be able to see more clearly the gifts and the talents that we have and encourage us to move towards those.
We enjoy being encouragers, especially when it's well-deserved, like it is in your case.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I've had that recently where I think as men especially, we don't often tell each other how we feel about one another or how we really view the other person. And I had a chance to kind of experience that probably for the first time ever in a group setting with some of the people that I would deem to be my closest friends. And it was unreal for me and kind of earth-shattering to just hear how they viewed me. Because it, like you said, Greg, their lens through which they were seeing me was not the lens that I see myself through on a consistent basis. And it really challenged my thinking, and not that one person's completely right and one person's completely wrong, but who is maybe I'm not seeing things as clearly as I maybe think I do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned that you had been to the workshop, and the topic for the podcast today actually came from something that you heard at the workshop. So why don't you introduce our topic?
Yeah. Greg had reached out and just asked if I had any ideas for podcasts. And one of the things that I had been remembering, probably in preparation for when Greg was going to ask me, was when I was in the workshop, you said something up to the effect of recovery can give you a lot of things and it can't give you everything. And so I thought that'd be a really interesting conversation. I think we talk a lot about all the good things that come from recovery, and there are a lot of good things. It's life-changing. But I want you, Greg, to answer the question or begin to answer the question. What are some things in recovery that we can't, or what are some things we can't get from recovery? Right. But I think I'd like just to hear you first talk about what do you say more than that in the workshop, and why is that a part of what you teach in the workshop? Well,
one thing I want to say is for some of you who have been to the workshop that have not heard me say that.
Okay.
It's just true. We do the workshops every month, and some things get said every month, some things don't. So some of you may go, and I don't remember that. Well, there's a reason. It doesn't always get said. But
welcome to the hot seat.
Yeah, that doesn't mean it's not important. And kind of the story of that is I probably have been in recovery for 5 years, maybe 4 or 5 years. So I'd been doing it for a while. And I was starting to experience this really profound grief. Yeah. And I didn't understand what the grief was about. And it took the help of my community, and I was a part of the therapy community at the time, just kind of processing that. And it was through those conversations that I began to realize that there were some things that I was hoping could be possible, that maybe even I believed that they were possible. Because when we begin to talk about recovery to someone who is in addiction, what we know is that their life is so consumed by the addiction, it is defining every aspect of their lives. Now, when we're in our addiction, we don't see that. But when we begin to step into recovery, start to experience freedom, we start to see things more clearly, there is this incredible amount of hope and belief that everything in your life can be transformed by the work of recovery. And so I began to realize that in time, there was so much that recovery could bring me. There was so much that I was excited about. And as I said at the workshop that time, and there's some things that it can't.
Yeah.
And so the first thing that I would say, one of the things that my recovery cannot do is change somebody else.
Right.
What it can do is influence somebody else. My recovery may invite somebody else to look at their own journey and story. But the reality is I cannot change somebody else through my recovery. And we hear stories all the time of people who have really been working a really good recovery program. They've been doing it for years, and their marriage is still in a difficult place, or they're still estranged from their children, or they still have a combative relationship with their parents. And so one of the things that I begin to realize is I can work my recovery, I can change, and I cannot change anybody else.
Yeah.
And there was just a grief that came with that. What's also true, though, and it's kind of a subtle nuance, is there were some people in my life, because of my work in recovery, they were influenced to choose recovery themselves, and our relationship has really changed because they were changed. There were other people in my life that, for a variety of different reasons, did not engage their own journey of recovery. And so the reality is they weren't significantly changed by my recovery.
Yeah.
But what was true is I was changed. And because I was changed, I changed the way I related to them. I changed the way I engaged them. I changed my expectations for that relationship. Right. I changed some of the boundaries in the relationship. And so what ended up happening was, because I changed, I brought that change to the relationship, and the relationship was changed, even though they weren't significantly changed in the relationship.
Yeah.
And so, or weren't significantly changed themselves. One of the things I would say, for those of you that have been in recovery for a while, and you find yourself discouraged, maybe even defeated, frustrated, because you were hoping that if you did a great recovery program, it would change other people in your life.
Yeah.
I just want to validate that's one of the things that recovery is just not able to do. It can influence others, it can invite others, but my recovery cannot change anybody else.
Yeah. I feel like that just kind of reminds me of the whole idea of like, we're moving away from managing outcomes to like basically managing ourselves. And then we kind of let the chips fall where they may, and we don't really know what's going to happen with other people. And I think that's like a hard thing to wrap our minds around and to kind of accept. But I think there is like so much freedom in kind of letting go. I've experienced that, letting go of like managing outcomes, because we can't really.
Right,
you know?
right. And what's true is, even if someone in our lives doesn't engage recovery, doesn't kind of really begin that inner journey, maybe even stays entrenched in some old patterns, there is still hope. And the hope isn't that I'm going to be able to change them.
Yeah.
The hope is, if I continue to change, maybe I can continue to invite them. And maybe there will be another influence. There will be another conversation that they will be able to respond. I often believe that in our most personal relationships, sometimes we are the last person someone can hear. And so, you know, when I'm in a difficult place in a relationship, I often pray, God, will you just bring someone else into their lives that they can hear from, and that they will speak truth to them, and maybe somebody else speaking the same truth will be able to land in them in a way that my words and my relationship with them can. And I also have to own, I bring my own chaos, my own history. So it makes sense that my voice can be muted when it comes to engaging people in my own story, because they've been influenced by the painful, difficult things I've done or the things that they've seen. And so therefore maybe they can't make that transition with me.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I guess the one thing that I thought about in regards to this was kind of this idea of like, if I look to things to validate me, or like my performance to validate me, like you better believe it's so easy to let that like performance or validation, acceptance, love through performance to be like just slide right into like the recovery life, where it's like, okay, like all those other things didn't work, but like if I just do recovery well enough, then I'm finally gonna like perform well enough to be accepted and loved,
right,
and included in whatever by people. And I feel like that's one of the things that I've probably slipped into just because it's so natural for me to have, to seek validation through how I'm performing or how I'm behaving. So again, it's like, no matter how like well I'm doing at recovery, it's never gonna be enough to feel validated.
Right.
Right. I need to feel validated because of who I am in God and what my identity is. That doesn't change compared to like how I'm performing, or because that changes, or how I'm feeling changes on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Well, we often say the goal is not to do recovery. The goal is to be in recovery.
Right.
And the only way that I'm going to be transformed is if I'm being in recovery, not performing it or doing it.
Right.
And when we're talking about spouses, we often say to the men, one of the things that your wife is wanting is to experience you as being different. They don't want you to convince them you're different. They don't want you to perform being different. They don't want you to demonstrate being different. They just need to experience that you are being different. And that's not going to come from you performing recovery.
Right.
And so allowing yourself to even understand, in my recovery, there may be times I have to recalibrate because I'm recognizing that I'm performing it more than I'm actually experiencing it.
Right.
But the invitation is to experience the transformation.
Yeah.
Aaron, can I ask, since attending and taking part in the Men's Journey workshop, and as your healing journey has started to really get the wheels rolling, what changes in yourself have you identified? What have you noticed that wasn't there before?
Yeah, well, I mean, so many things. But I think the one thing that I've really noticed recently that I can point out to is like, this might sound weird, but like, well, no, it's not going to sound weird. I like can tolerate like looking at myself in the mirror and actually like feel okay with myself, or like just like content and satisfied, and that's like and before I would just like avoid even looking in mirrors, and it's I feel like it's a simple thing, but for me, it's so profound and so visceral because it's like, I know what it's like to walk by a mirror and like avert my gaze.
Right.
And I don't do that anymore, So that's like one thing I can think of right off the top of my head.
And one thing I want to you said it, but I want to reinforce it. That's not a small thing.
Right.
Because what that is indicating is you are able to see yourself more clearly and not through the lens of shame.
Yeah.
Shame is what causes us to avert our eyes. My therapist one time said, shame is always in the eyes. And when we're not able to see ourselves. And what's interesting is it can be that literal, physical, I don't want to see myself in the mirror. But what also is true is that shame keeps me from looking real closely at the fullness of who I am. And it's not just about who I am physically. It's also about being able to embrace the chaos that is within me, the choices that I've made, the hurt that I've caused, and to see it through a lens of truth, not through the lens of shame. And so there is this freedom to see ourselves and to be able to see ourselves more clearly when the shame begins to be healed.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing else is coming to my head right now, but if I think of something else, I'll make sure I chime in and add it.
Well, it's interesting because this whole subject of shame and guilt, tomorrow morning we're going to have a full house arriving for the Men's Journey workshop this month. We're thrilled about that, but it's interesting as Greg is at the front desk welcoming these guys that come in the door. There's so many times that you can visually see the shame and guilt that they're carrying on their shoulders when they walk in. And the difference between Thursday morning's check-in and Saturday afternoon's goodbyes, it's as if an anvil is lifted off their shoulders over the course of the workshop. And so when we have men out there that are thinking about registering for the Men's Journey workshop, I think it's good for them to hear conversations like this because you're relatively fresh from that experience. And I think that's probably a really strong desire for most men to shed, for as much as they can, the guilt and shame that they carry.
Yeah.
So
so that's a great segue.
Thank you.
Something else that I think we realize the longer that we're in recovery is that we can never be fully free.
Yeah.
That I've been in recovery for 18 years and I still can carry the weight of shame. I still can get lost in the lies that I can believe about myself. And it's absolutely significantly less than it was, and it's still present. I think early in recovery, I thought, okay, if I do recovery really well, I will be completely free.
Yeah.
And you just begin to realize that that freedom that we all hope for is possible, but the invitation is that will occur in this next season after death, that total freedom that comes at that point. But in this place, we live with some of that burden. We're not completely free.
Right.
And so if you've been in recovery for a while and you still can get triggered into your shame, I know that one of another thing I would say is, even if I do recovery well, I will never be free from my triggers.
Yeah.
So here I am still triggered, but they look different and they may be about different things. But if a trigger is an involuntary reaction, the more I heal, the less I'm triggered and the less intense the triggers are.
Yeah.
And there still can be triggers. I can get triggered into my anxiety, and I've learned a lot of skills and tools and ways to navigate that, but it's still there.
Right.
And so understanding if I'm still in the recovery journey and I'm still struggling with some certain things, it's okay, because that's going to be expected. Total healing, total freedom isn't possible on this side of eternity, or before we enter into that next season of total freedom.
Yeah. That's why I love the teaching of, like, in the workshop of, little boy, survivor man, and wise man. And the goal is not to become this perfectly wise man all the time. It's, I want to be in my wise man chair more than I was the day before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about that, like, slow progress in a direction, as opposed to trying to achieve some sort of status,
Right.
which is just so, like, toxic and draining.
Right.
Because, like we just talked about, we can't ever get there.
Right. One thing I would say, though, for those who are early in recovery, if we're committed to the recovery program, what does happen over time is, we talk about recovery, that this is the journey of becoming the person that God created you to be.
Yeah.
We are always going to be on that journey.
Right.
We are always wanting to be shaped and formed so that we can become more fully that person. What's also true, though, is that journey changes. So therefore, it's no longer about trying to avoid a behavior or manage a behavior or to limit a behavior. As I do my work in recovery, it becomes less about the behavior. I don't feel the pull to the acting out. I don't feel consumed by that. And I do continue to find things that I need to work on, the things in my life that keep me from being that person. Yeah. So we're not saying there is no lightening of the load. It's just that we don't ever get completely free from that load.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Something else that I would add about this is to remind myself, if I'm getting triggered, whatever that trigger can be, what we want to look at is when you do get triggered, do you stay in that triggered place for a shorter amount of time? That's progress. That's you moving forward. If you get triggered, is the trigger less? Was there a time when that particular trigger would have sent you to a 10 and now it sends you to like a 4? That's progress. Yeah. So it's not just, am I triggered or not triggered? It's what is the intensity? What is the duration of the trigger? And do I have the skills necessary to be able to steward when I'm triggered, so that in that moment I learn more about who I am and what really is getting triggered in me, because that's what I need to pay attention to.
Right. Yeah, because it's all about trying to figure out what is my desire that's not bad, that's good, that I need to, like, fill right now. What is my longing? So yeah.
Something else that I would add to this list of what recovery can't bring us is recovery cannot change our past. And on a logical cognitive level, we know that. And I think within each of us, there's this emotional part of us that desperately wants to have some sort of experience in the present that will be significant enough that it can change the past. Yeah. And what I believe is that the past cannot be changed. and the past can be redeemed. And that redemption occurs as I am being set free from the past and not held hostage by the chaos, the hurt, the woundedness, the things that in the past I have allowed to define me. As I find freedom moving into the future, that's how the past is redeemed. For people who listen, you may know part of my story, and part of my story is when I was an adolescent, I experienced sexual abuse. And so there was a season in my life when I flew back to the person who had abused me. I had a conversation with him, acknowledging what had happened. And what was true is, in a textbook way, everything in that experience went very well. And I really do think it's one of the places in my life that God orchestrated something really amazing. And I remember the experience being over. I got on a plane, I flew home, and I was just incredibly sad about that experience. And I was confused about that. And I remember reading a couple of days later in a book, for those people who have had those experiences, that what happens is, even if it goes incredibly well, what happens is you are reminded that you can never fully take back what was taken away. And I apply that a lot to this idea of recovery, where even if we're doing recovery incredibly well, whether we're talking about experiences that we've had or we're talking about choices that we've made, when it comes to the past, a beautiful recovery now cannot change the past, and it can redeem the past.
Yeah, I love that story. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, that's a great
good.
story.
Yeah.
So on your own, what are some of the successes that you're feeling on your healing journey thus far? What are the things that you're feeling good about?
Yeah, there's something else that I was going to mention. My mind is blank, probably because I'm being put on the spot, and that's okay. So I don't know. My mind is blank right now.
Well,
So
I didn't mean
I'm
to.
just going to own that. That's okay.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. That's the great thing about the podcast. We're able to all reveal the human side of things like
absolutely.
that. Well, I think we're starting to run a little close on the time here.
So one thing, kind of a final note, is I absolutely want people to hear that though there are some things that recovery cannot bring us, it is absolutely worth it because of all that recovery does bring us.
Absolutely.
The hope, the freedom, the intimacy, the connection, the transformation, the strengthening of our faith, all of those things, the living congruently, it's worth it. And so, yes, there are some things that recovery can't bring us that we will need to grieve, and we can celebrate all it is that recovery does bring us.
Yeah,
So-
I don't even feel like I was being sarcastic or hyperbolic when I started the show, and I said, it's totally changed my life.
Right.
That's
Right.
It's true. I
Absolutely.
totally stand behind that statement. So even if my mind went blank and I couldn't give you a specific
know,
reason, you can
So
take
you
my word
can't
for it.
provide the detail.
If I
We'll
were-
stay tuned. That's all right.
I just had my one story with the seeing myself in the mirror.
Well, that was a powerful story. If after hearing this podcast today, you're finding yourself in a similar situation where you'd love to attain that freedom, that reduction of guilt and shame, and would like to come to the Men's Journey Workshop, we do it every month here at Faithful and True, and we invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com, our website. Click on the workshops and then click on Men's Journey Workshop. There you'll find lots of information about this event that we do every month. We've got lots of resources that are free to you on the website, over 400 podcasts like this. We have our bookstore online, and there are blogs and just lots of information that may be helpful to you, and that's what we're here for. If you've seen any of our Facebook or social media ads, we make it clear that if you're struggling with any of these sexual addiction challenges, we can help. And that's what we're here for. So we invite you to do that. In the meantime, we thank you for joining us. Our listenership, our viewership, the numbers are way up as Aaron reported to our all-staff call last week. We're just very pleased with those of you that are tuning in and listening on a regular basis. So we encourage you to continue that. So in the meantime, may this week be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.